And thanks for joining me, everyone. Charles Moscowitz here. Welcome to the program, live streamed at YouTube and other subscribing platforms. Let me just briefly get in a quick plug here for my new book, God is God. God is the Creator and Lawgiver, now available at Amazon.com, Barnes & Noble, and in major bookstores. And my guest is Daniel Greenfield. Daniel is a journalist. He's a columnist at FrontPage magazine. Daniel, your scholarship and your research is broad and vast and is very cutting edge. You're always on the top of so many issues. I barely know where to start. So let's just right off the bat get your impression on what is possible is one of the biggest events that we have confronted possibly in our lifetimes, and that is in 2 weeks, the election of 2020. How do you think President Trump is doing, and what do you think is going to happen?
So this election is unprecedented in any number of ways. The obvious ways is that we're dealing with the pandemic lockdowns. We're dealing with, as a result, with unprecedented voter fraud. We're also dealing with unprecedented, this is not media bias anymore. People used to call this bias. This is not bias. This is bias the same way that Pravda was biased, the same way that Xinhua or Al Jazeera bias. It's state media. We're dealing with essentially a state media that is fundamentally wired into the Democrat Party and into their agenda. And we've seen outrageous levels of integration and control by a media cartel with a social media cartel, with a big tech cartel, to block stories unfavorable to Joe Biden. This is not something that you would normally see outside someplace like, say, communist China, but we're now seeing it in America. We just had the NPR public editor coming out and saying that they're not going to cover the Hunter Biden revelations because there's just nothing there and it's a distraction. We don't want to waste the time of our readers. They're jumping from one excuse to another. The bottom line is we're not going to cover this because we support the Democrat candidate. We want him to win at any cost. We're no longer committed to any kind of liberal open system. Instead, we are going to enforce our way. We're going to use all of our power. We're not going to even pretend that there's any middle ground here, that we're committed to any kind of open democratic system. It's going to be our way, period. That's the real message here.
It is an open communistic control, public ownership of the means of communication, which is the classic definition of socialism. And on the surface, I'd like to think that it's backfiring on them because by not covering the Biden scandal, it could very well amplify it. But by any conventional definition, it is a scandal that should be covered. I mean, we have a graft, we have influence peddling, kickbacks, bribery, a level of corruption that would normally knock any person out of the office and possibly put someone in jail. So my understanding is that the latest I've heard is that tonight's debate, besides having a literal ability to mute the mic to control what President Trump says, there is going to be an attempt to not allow any discussion about the Biden scandal. And it's very coordinated and mechanized media. And it's at a level that it's unprecedented in American history, this kind of control and censorship. I don't think there's an example in American history where it has been this bad.
There's no such example. Bottom line is the media has become a cartel. It's operating like a cartel. It's coordinating, it's integrating. It's using that to suppress competition. I mean, this is actually what happened right after 2016. They did their own autopsy, and their own autopsy determined it's not that the Democrats failed, it's that we failed to control the outside messaging. So their big target was Facebook. They've been whacking away at getting Facebook to suppress content. They've done it by embedding so-called fact checkers into it. And they've done it largely by pressuring Facebook to closely control messaging around Election Day, which is what we're seeing now. They've also imposed message discipline within. There have been coups, purges within the media, younger, radical, so-called woke staffers forcing out older, more professional journalists to ensure that the media was not going to cover anything, any kind of scandals about Biden. So they've been prepping for this for 4 years. They're ready. We're seeing this machine being deployed now. That's the result of that. because what they determined was if we had not covered Hillary's emails, if we had suppressed it, if we had not allowed conservatives to have ability to speak on Facebook or Twitter, Hillary Clinton would have won. We're now seeing that strategy being deployed.
So they've decided they will suppress the emails and the information that's coming out about the kickbacks and the bribery that Biden has been involved in. I mean, I feel nervous even mentioning it because I'm afraid I'll lose my own small YouTube channel over this. And it's that bad. It's sort of like what Fred Friendly, the great media figure in the late 1950s, said when he and Edward R. Murrow were thinking about doing a documentary on Senator Joe McCarthy, which was an attack piece and an unfair one, but nevertheless, they were concerned that they could end up being investigated and censored. And he turned to Edward R. Murrow and said, if the fear is in this room, we've got to do it. And I think that fear is in this room. There is a fear that we could be purged. There's talk among left-wing pundits like Chris Hayes and a couple of others that if and when Biden does win, God forbid, there's going to be a Truth and Reconciliation Commission that's going to target people like you, probably, Daniel, because you're more prominent than I am, but any conservative, any journalist who criticized, who supported Trump is going to be hauled before some committee. I mean, this is how bad it's getting.
It's only getting worse. There's extensive talk about a day one purge within the government of any people who are suspected of being conservatives. Biden is calling for a so-called commission, which is, among other things, going to recommend court packing, but some other things as well. So they're going to solidify their hold on the government. They're going to solidify their hold on big tech, on social media, which essentially is going to suppress any dissenting views. And they're going to increasingly go after the First Amendment, which is really the fundamental issue here. Because the First Amendment has been a kind of barrier for them to engage in the kind of suppression that they would like to engage in. They've had to outsource this to private companies, so they will say, yes, Google controls 88% of search. They control, so obviously, YouTube and so much else. They will say Facebook only controls 80% of social media through its own site and its various apps that it owns. So they're a private company, but they're not a monopoly, and they can censor conservatives, and that's okay. It's not a First Amendment violation, as one leftist said. It's First Amendment friendly solution. It's a First Amendment friendly solution to have a corporate monopoly and then to use that and to have openly Democrat officials pressuring it to censor dissenting views. That's perfectly okay. But they actually obviously want to use the power of the law to censor. The big barrier here is the First Amendment, but they've gotten around this before. Canada and Australia, for example, used to be much more open to free speech. Of course, they put in hate speech codes, and that obviously tanks everything. At that point, everything you decide is hate speech can then be suppressed, and then it's all over. Then the only free speech that's actually defended is free speech supported by the authorities, which, of course, is the only speech that doesn't need any defending. So they've been at this for a while. You've had multiple, for example, pieces in the New York Times from critical race theory people arguing that hate speech is actually a form of physical damage, that it causes trauma, that it causes health issues. This is something you can expect them to start litigating under a Biden administration. They will actually start making the argument that hate speech should not be protected by the First Amendment, that it causes health issues, that it causes physical damage, that it causes literal harm. And of course, once you do that, then it's all over.
What about hate speech against conservatives? But look, there should be, and in a classic philosophical sense, there is no such thing as hate speech under the law, with one exception, that being which was carved out by Chief Justice Oliver Wendell Holmes. You can't yell fire in a crowded theater. Beyond that, we're talking political opinion, and we're talking about the creation of political crimes. This is what they do in communist China, where they execute 50,000 people a year, according to Amnesty International, for political crimes, crimes against the state, not actual crimes, not, murder or robbery, but political crimes, opinions that are seen as antithetical to the interest of the communist state. And in this country, the idea of hate speech is something that could be used if someone is charged with a crime, and in the course of prosecution by lawyers, you can bring up things like that, and should. to show bias and to show intent for someone who might have committed a crime. But the actual hate speech itself is not the crime. It only goes to motivation in an actual crime. So the idea of putting political crimes into the American system, the American bloodstream, as it were, is something that is a totalitarian agenda. And it's one that should never happen in a free society.
So we've seen, again, in the last 4 years, the creation of a whole class of political crimes. Some of the things that the media now talks about on a regular basis, like disinformation or information warfare. What does this stuff even mean? This has no precedent in American history. If you had people stating things and you disagreed with them, you argued with them. Now, of course, it's disinformation. It needs to be controlled. Disinformation, they keep telling us, is a threat to democracy. Never mind that America's a republic. We're not even going to litigate that. The entire idea that a country's political system needs to be protected from disinformation is itself a constant call for censorship. And the media, Democrat officials have been doing this repeatedly without ever being called out for it. They keep claiming that disinformation is a threat to our political system, to our elections. What does that actually mean? It means that we urgently need to control information. Otherwise, our whole system will collapse. If we don't actually censor people we disagree with, it will collapse. And what is information? Disinformation, as you put it, is a political crime. It's the crime of disagreeing with the establishment.
It's also a political football in terms of deciding when and what constitutes disinformation. I noticed that before the first debate, there was a lot of talk from left-wing pundits about putting in place a fact checker, having somebody to sit there. So every time President Trump allegedly lied, they would fact check. And after the debate, you heard nothing about that because President Trump, the big liar on that stage was Biden when he denied knowing anything about the influence peddling conducted, he was conducting through his relatives, his son-in-law, his brother, to blackmail foreign governments into doing things that he wanted. In his case, mainly giving them money and then getting kickbacks. When President Trump brought that up, they say nothing about fact checking now because they let that go. There was no comments about it. It was as if it didn't happen. When Biden said there was no such thing as Antifa, there was no fact check on that one because it didn't help their agenda. So the idea of doing fact checking should be viewed in the lens of what the left is. It's a situational, it's a dialectical. It's like facts can only be used if they fit furthering our totalitarian agenda, and if they don't, we don't talk about it.
Exactly. They treat facts much like they do science. It's entirely what serves our political agenda. And the whole fact-checking industry is very deeply perverse because, you go back to classic journalism. Fact-checking meant you checked your own facts. The reporter submits a story, then somebody actually checks it. And in the modern media, there's zero fact-checking. There is literally no fact-checking whatsoever. Some media outlets have said, we're just going to let people on social media fact-check us. When the New York Times ran its infamous piece on mentioning Sarah Palin, falsely accusing her of complicity in the Gifford shooting, the lawsuit revealed the process. There was zero fact-checking whatsoever. They actually went back to a Frank Rich column. And Frank Rich is not a journalist. He's just a former, I believe, food critic who writes angry things about Republicans. He mentioned that, okay, we're going to go with that. That's their level of fact-checking. They do zero fact-checking, but they've created this vast industry where you need to fact-check conservatives. You need to fact-check populists. You need to fact-check these people who are putting disinformation out there. And again, it is a cartel like everything else. It's a blatantly illegal cartel because you've got the so-called International Fact-Checking Network run by Poynter, which is both a journalism school and it owns a newspaper, and it's got a whole bunch of different businesses wired together, for-profit and non-profits in interesting ways. It includes Snopes, which has absolutely no journalistic credibility. I mean, it's a company created by the guys who did the flying toaster screensavers back in the day. And their goal is to basically provide justification for suppressing conservative content on social media. So Facebook will partner with these so-called fact checkers, with this fact-checking cartel, and it will suppress them. And meanwhile, the fact checkers, of course, get placement. So the more they do their so-called fact checking, the more traffic they get, the more money they make. So they've created an absolute interest in doing so. Meanwhile, the media itself, which is in desperate need of fact-checking, never actually fact-checks itself, and yet keeps saying we have a problem. There are just lies. President Trump lied 50,000 times in the last 4 seconds. We need to do more fact-checking. And yet, meanwhile, they will make the most outrageous, ridiculous howlers. Again, Yesterday on social media, some college Democrat student created a fake thing where Giuliani was supposedly texting her. Every journalist retweeted this. Zero fact
Oh,
checking.
yeah, sure. I mean, this is what's happened to journalism. You're a professional journalist. I know you've observed this, that since Trump won the election, now there are even the New York Times, the Washington Post, supposedly respectable media outlets will run a story with one anonymous source. And they do this almost every day. I noticed just the other day, they ran a story. Donald Trump has been endorsed by the Taliban, right? Oh my God. I mean, then the next day they retract it because there was absolutely no evidence for it whatsoever. But the problem is that the damage had been done. The Trump haters got to have a full day of screaming and yelling and puffing out their chest over this. And I mean, it would be like if I called up the Boston Globe and said, Joe Biden raped my wife. I mean, and they said, oh, good. And they ran with it on the front page. This is what it's like. I mean, there are no standards. It's all completely out the window. It's anything to try to throw mud at Trump.
Yeah. I mean, two recent examples. New York Times ran this high-profile piece about this lady who got into a confrontation with a black guy in Central Park, and the headline was, Amy Cooper made 2 phone calls. Then they buried a correction which mentioned, yes, she didn't actually make 2 phone calls. She made 1 phone call, then the dispatcher called her back. This is fairly typical, and we've got the Hunter Biden laptop story. Again, the same thing has been happening over and over again. When the media began claiming it was a Russian disinformation campaign, where did they get that? There was Spencer Ackerman, who's one of the worst, pernicious figures in the media, had a Daily Beast piece where he quoted an anonymous congressional source. No word if it's
Adam Schiff. And Adam Schiff went public and said, oh, it's the Ruskies are coming. It's sort of like the old, the red under every bed. They're trying to dredge up Joe McCarthy. I mean, of course, McCarthy was right, but putting that aside, now it's like they're trying to turn the tables, 50 years later and say, it's the Ruskies. They're going to take over the country. The Russians are coming. The Russians are coming. And Ratcliffe had to step up and say, this is absolutely false. But he gets away with it because he knows that he's going to get these stooges in the media, the same people that backed the impeachment over the perfect phone call and the Mueller brown shirts. They're going to put him on and they're going to give him favorable treatment and let him spout off.
But in this case, you've got a so-called anonymous source coming forward to say that the FBI is investigating this as a Russian disinformation operation. Everybody ran with it. The FBI issued a statement saying that we are not doing this. There's zero traction. There's zero, okay, this conflicts with it. Nothing. The media will just go with it.
Well, now they're still going with that. They're still going to push that right up to Election Day, that this is the so-called laptop. This is not proven. This questionable. It's some, they're going to create some kind of a conspiracy theory around this. And the big media, the same people that, again, pushed the brown shirts with Mueller, who arrested an elderly man who'd never been charged with a crime by showing up with 27 SWAT team members and CNN filming it on the front lawn. The same people who supported that are going to support this lie right up till Election Day. So, Daniel, what do you think is going to happen on Election Day? God willing. I mean, it's a nail biter. I mean, my heart sinks when I look at things like the Drudge Report, which is as left as anything. Biden is ahead by 30 points. He's ahead by 80 points. I mean, it's insane. What's going to happen?
So the biggest problem is that there isn't an election day. What the Democrats have done using the pandemic and lockdowns as a justification is created what they call election week, or this indefinite election period that they're going to be able to litigate indefinitely. So nobody should be in the business of predicting what's actually going to happen on election day. But bottom line is we are likely to see President Trump try to claim a victory early on. The media and the social media have already prepared to suppress any such claims, any such statements, which is, again, also surreal and un-American. The Democrats are going to litigate. They're going to find as many ballots as it takes. This is almost certainly going to go to the Supreme Court. And this is part of what the battle is about. It's getting another justice on the Supreme Court to hopefully actually act as a firewall against yet another attempt to steal an election.
It's almost providential that Amy Coney Barrett will be confirmed, apparently, God willing, on Monday. So, yeah, they will be in place and she can counter this, frankly, traitorous and blackmailed Judge Roberts from once again stepping in and trying to screw the country.
Well, we could very well be looking at indefinite periods of litigation and increasingly blatant power grabs because at some point the Democrats are going to declare victory. President Trump can declare victory. There's going to be a potentially literal battle over the White House. And we don't know exactly how that's going to escalate. If the Supreme Court acts as a firewall, the Democrats might still not back off.
Oh, they probably won't. I mean, Hillary Clinton said it best, said, don't concede no matter what. Keep fighting, keep going. I mean, the template for that is Stacey Abrams in Georgia, who is yet to concede. She still thinks she's governor. It's they'll never stop. Trump is going to have to win a sizable victory to stop this. And I've heard that this could happen. I mean, the early vote has not worked the way the Democrats hoped it would. They thought they'd get a big turnout. They've gotten a little advantage, but not enough to matter. I mean, like a tiny percentage. And there's even rumors that California could go red. That would be amazing. Oh my God, that would be so incredible.
That would be amazing, but I wouldn't bet on it. California is a one-party state.
Let's not get too excited. Yeah,
it's a one-party state.
So well, that's why I'm saying
it was going to go red in 2016. These are one-party states. They're under the control of the political machine. When the political machine controls everything, you don't get to vote. Your votes are meaningless.
No, the whole thing is a corrupt. I mean, I remember when there were recounts, or when Obama won a second term, there were counties where you had Obama get like 100%, 105% of the vote. I mean, it was obviously these big machine cities, these rotten Democrat cities where you've got black businesses being looted and black homes being burned. They have been controlled by corrupt Democrat machines for decades, and they're going to turn out their vote any way they want.
Absolutely. Take Detroit. The last time around, 36 of the precincts there had the wrong number of votes on the records, and we never actually solved that one. It's just places like Chicago, Detroit, they're key levers, Philly, for rigging swing states. Miami-Dade.
And yet, there are rumors that Trump is making inroads in the Black community and the Hispanic community. It would be a beautiful thing to see, but we can't know. I mean, if Trump can peel off even 1 or 2% of the black vote, that could be enough to win. But
it does look like he's going to be able to do that.
Okay. So Daniel, you have so many interesting articles from so many different directions. I mean, it's hard to even begin. So please talk about what your latest research is unveiling.
So one of the key things we were discussing is big tech censorship. And a lot of people are unaware of just how closely Facebook and Twitter, not to mention very obviously Amazon, that's not a surprise to most people, are tied to communist China. So Facebook and Twitter are officially banned in China. And people think, well, I guess they don't have a connection there. Actually, $5 billion in Facebook's advertising is coming from China. Facebook has a significant presence there, but Facebook can't operate in China itself, but Chinese businesses are using Facebook to advertise to Americans, which means that it's actually Facebook's second biggest market, which means China has a lot of control over what Facebook does. Likewise, Twitter does not release its numbers, but China is a significant portion of its advertising, the people who actually are buying the ads. So when recently China began running ads, and by the way, Chinese government is running ads on a large scale for its own to propagandize to Americans, including attacks on President Trump on Facebook and Twitter. Absolutely nobody is talking about this. But recently, when they began running ads attacking the Hong Kong protesters, there was a bit of a backlash. They were shamed into taking down those ads, and very quickly, the official Chinese state organs began warning that if this continues, we're going to cut off all the ad money. So people don't realize just how thoroughly big tech is controlled by China. I did a lot of deep dive into just Amazon. For example, so many people are shopping at Amazon, and you buy stuff, it turns out to be counterfeit garbage. Because the bottom line is a majority of Amazon's products are now coming through third-party sellers. A majority of third-party sellers are operating out of China. Amazon itself can't really properly do business in China. Like everything else, the Chinese limit companies that do business in their country to companies connected to the Communist Party. But Amazon sellers are largely coming out of China. And what Amazon is really doing, it's doing fulfillment services between American customers and Chinese sellers. So what you're getting is Chinese junk on a regular basis. It's Chinese junk that actually counterfeits American products. There's been almost no enforcement about this in that regard. Meanwhile, Amazon is consuming the American retail sector. It's destroying American manufacturing. It's destroying American jobs on an epic, massive scale. And this is something that we absolutely need to be taking on.
Oh, I mean, if the only person standing in the way of China taking over the country is Trump, and I mean, one of the reasons I didn't publish my newest book, God is God, with Amazon this time is because I've heard that several people that I know have had their books removed from Amazon's book list, including James Perloff's book about COVID-19, just taken down, and so I published with Ingram Spark, but the China, in a way, is operating in a manner similar to the old Soviet Union in terms of using blackmail to control politicians, and sometimes that involves, the so-called honeypot and sort of under the cover operations. And there are more than rumors that would indicate that this could happen with Biden in terms of the Hunter Biden laptop, which he stupidly left with. I can't believe that he would have done something so dumb. Left with a, a tech store in Delaware, and it ended up in the hands of the FBI and Rudy Giuliani. But on that laptop are some very, very seedy and illegal activities, possibly with underage girls, Chinese girls, who very well might have been set up by the Chinese to entrap. And this is an old story. I mean, this isn't new. I mean, this is the kind of things that nations have been doing since Roman times. I mean, but I bring it up only to point out, and I'm not getting into specifics here because I don't know, but that this is a serious question of blackmail for Biden if he's elected. They have him, or by the what, if they've got this kind of information which they can use. And it wouldn't be the first time this has happened. So, do you have any data on that, Daniel?
So you've got Joe Biden, you've got Hunter Biden, you've got James Biden building all these international contacts with countries that are deeply crooked and corrupt. And, obviously we had this with the Clintons, and the other common denominator between the Bidens and the Clintons is just a complete basic lack of self-control. That's what we were seeing on the Hunter Biden laptop. We're seeing a guy who has absolutely no self-control, who is just cruising, who seems to be using drugs, who is involved with women, unclear, possibly might be involved with underage girls. And then, of course, the laptop is just dropped off and forgotten about. These are people who have no self-control. And the only thing worse than having cunning crooks, people who are actually brilliant manipulators in charge of a country, is having completely inept, out of control, corrupt, end of Roman Empire, decadent people like this. People like Bill Clinton, people like Joe Biden. I mean, where does Hunter Biden get this stuff? I mean, just look at Joe Biden, look at the way he acts around women. This is the role model.
Oh,
These people have no self-control, and that makes them absolutely vulnerable to foreign influence.
Well, the big problem, of course, with Hunter Biden is that the father facilitated it, that he was getting a cut of the money that he set him up as a straw to blackmail foreign regimes like Ukraine and China and Kazakhstan. And that, it's really disgusting and immoral in that here you have this guy who is obviously has a serious drug addiction, and the father knows this. I mean, he was dishonorably discharged from the army for that, and yet the father continues to use him as a straw and as a conduit for these overseas, pay-by-play schemes. I mean, it just shows what kind of a person he is, but it also implicates him.
Yeah, there's no question that both Bidens are very, very seriously messed up, and they have certain things in common. When it comes to women, when it comes to money, when it comes to just lying, there's very similar personalities. Hunter Biden is very much a reflection of Joe Biden. His corruption is very much obviously goes back to Joe Biden. And you're dealing with people who would potentially be in charge of a country who are vulnerable to blackmail, who are vulnerable to bribery, or vulnerable to just about anything because they have no basic self-control. And that's
they've got no moral compass. I mean, that's right. And he's worth something like $1.5 billion. No one asked where the money came from. And then now we have the New York Times and the big media and the Drudge Report. Well, Donald Trump had contracts with China. Hello, there's nothing wrong with that. He was doing business with China before he was president. He's an international businessman. He didn't use his public office to get anything. I mean, this is perfectly legitimate. So, it's I hope it's grasping at straws, and I hope enough Americans are waking up. I've heard rumors that they are. I feel somewhat optimistic, but there's so much at stake that you just, it's just difficult. Anyways, Daniel, let my viewers and listeners know where they can read your excellent articles.
So I'm a Shillman Journalism Fellow at the Freedom Center. I'm published daily at frontpagemag.com, working for David Horowitz, who's a conservative icon and a real hero. And, we're fighting this good fight together until Election Day and beyond.
Thank God you are. Daniel Greenfield, as always, thank you very much. It's an honor and a privilege. Thank you.
The honor's mine.